My son told me he didn't want me at his wedding, said it was just for his real family. So I stayed home. Later, I saw the photos of him dancing with his stepdad, and not a single memory of me left in the room. What happened next was rather unbelievable. I will tell you everything. My name was Daniel Pierce. For over 2 decades, I had worked as an architect, tracing lines across paper with a steady hand, believing that if I could just build something strong enough, it would last forever. But that night, I was alone in my living room, the quiet pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. Michael, my son, had told me last month that he didn't want me at his wedding. He said it softly, almost like an afterthought, his eyes fixed on a spot just beyond my shoulder. "It's just for my real family," he'd said. I'd nodded, trying to hide the tremor in my hands. I wanted to believe I understood. But the truth was, those words had split something in me that I wasn't sure could ever be put back together. So I stayed home. I didn't iron my best shirt or polish the shoes I'd worn to every milestone in his life. Graduations, birthdays, the father-son dinner we used to have every spring. I sat instead in the living room, the ticking of the old clock in the hallway marking each second that passed in this hollow space. I'd poured myself a glass of scotch, hoping the burn would drown out the ache in my chest. On the coffee table in front of me rested a worn leather photo album. The edges had softened over the years, the brown cover cracked where fingers had turned its pages too many times. My fingers hovered over it for a moment. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what lay inside, but I needed to remember that once there had been love here. When I opened it, the first image that met my eyes was Michael at 5, his hair wild from the ocean breeze, his small hand holding a seashell he'd insisted was worth more than gold. My hand rested on his shoulder, steady and sure. In that photo, he was still mine. We both were. I turned the pages slowly, each image a reminder of the years I'd spent building a life for him. His first bike ride, the way he'd laughed when he finally found his balance and rode straight into my waiting arms. The science fair project we'd built together, the planets painted in bright, hopeful colors. Every birthday cake I'd stayed up late baking because he said he liked mine best. Those photos felt like fragments of a life that no longer belonged to me. Earlier that afternoon, I'd seen the wedding photos posted online. Michael in a crisp suit, his face bright with laughter as he danced with his stepfather, another man in my place. In every frame, I was nowhere to be found. It was as if I'd been erased from the story altogether. I took another sip of scotch, the heat of it spreading through the cold in my bones. The photos on my screen were sharp and bright, but here in my hands, the images were softer, worn down by the years. I traced the edges of a photo of Michael at 12, holding up a model plane we'd built together in the garage. His smile was crooked, missing a tooth, and I remembered how proud he'd been. I wondered if he remembered any of that now. The house felt impossibly still. I could almost hear the echoes of his laughter, the small footsteps that once filled these rooms. I thought of how, for years, I'd measured my life in the moments we shared, bedtime stories, scraped knees, the way he looked at me with complete trust. Now, there was only this quiet, and the knowledge that he had chosen to leave me out of his life's most important day. I closed the photo album and rested my hand on the cover, feeling the soft creases of the leather under my fingertips. My hands looked older than I remembered, calloused and worn. In the space above the fireplace, there was a blank wall where I'd always meant to hang a family portrait. I stared at it for a long time, letting the emptiness of that wall seep into me. I tried to picture the wedding, Michael's laughter, the music swelling, the way he must have looked as he danced. I wondered if he had thought of me at all. If, in some small, passing moment, he had remembered the man who had taught him how to throw a baseball, how to mend a broken toy, how to find his balance on 2 wheels. I leaned back into the couch, the leather creaking softly beneath me. The world outside was quiet, the darkness pressing in through the windows. In that quiet, I felt something shift inside me. For so long, I believed that if I gave enough love, enough patience, I could build something that would stand the test of time. But sitting there, with nothing but memories to keep me company, I realized that even the strongest foundation can't hold up a house someone has already left. Let them have their photos, their laughter, their new family. I knew what I had given, even if it had never been enough. And in the quiet of that night, I began to understand that sometimes the only thing left to do is let go. The days after the wedding felt like walking through a fog I couldn't clear. I went to work because it was easier than sitting in this house alone. In my office, the drafting table was a constant comfort, clean lines and precise angles, the only part of my life that still made sense. I'd run my hands over the smooth paper, tracing blueprints for homes that would stand longer than the fragile connections in my own life. Yet even there, Michael's absence clung to me. Every time I picked up a pencil, I thought of the model airplane we'd built together, the two of us hunched over the kitchen table, sawdust in his hair. I wondered if he still remembered how I'd taught him to hold the blade just right, how to carve along the grain instead of against it, or if those memories had been replaced by someone else's hand. I found myself glancing at my phone more often than I wanted to admit, half hoping for a message that never came. I didn't know what I wanted it to say, maybe an apology, or maybe just an explanation. But the screen stayed dark. My colleagues at the firm noticed I was quieter than usual. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. I moved through each day like a man sleepwalking, my mind stuck in the past. In the evenings, I'd sit at my desk long after the office was empty, the lamplight casting long shadows on the walls. I thought of the wedding photos I'd seen. The easy laughter on Michael's face as he clinked glasses with the man who had replaced me. I thought of the music they'd danced to, and how I hadn't been there to see it. One night, when the silence of the office felt too heavy, I called an old friend, James, a man who had known me since college. I tried to talk about the wedding, but the words caught in my throat. All I could manage was, he didn't want me there. James didn't know what to say. Neither did I. I hung up before he could find the right words, because I didn't think there were any. A few days later, I learned that Michael's stepfather had paid for most of the wedding. That detail settled into my chest like a stone. It was as though every memory I'd built with Michael had been replaced, one by one, by a man who had stepped in when I wasn't enough. I pictured them all raising glasses to the new man in his life, and I wondered if he'd ever pause to remember the father who had taught him how to ride a bike, who had sat through every piano recital and cheered the loudest. At night, I lay in bed and let the memories wash over me like a tide I couldn't hold back. I saw Michael at 10, standing at the edge of the lake, fishing rod in his small hands. I saw him at 16, the way he'd laughed when I gave him the keys to my old car, the pride in his eyes as he turned the ignition. Each memory was a ghost that lived here now, haunting the empty rooms. I thought about the money I'd set aside for him, his college fund, every dollar saved from late nights and second jobs. It had always been meant for him, a gift I'd built brick by brick, hoping it would help him build something of his own. But now, that money felt like another offering to a son who no longer saw me. I didn't know what to do with it yet, but I knew it no longer belonged to him, not in the way I'd once believed. The night stretched long and silent. I stopped answering calls, stopped pretending that I was fine. I let the grief settle in me like dust on an old shelf, unmoved and untouched. I found a strange comfort in that quiet. No explanations, no need to hold myself together for anyone else. In those dark hours, I realized that love is never as simple as it seems, that it can be built on a foundation of devotion, only to be washed away by a single choice. And maybe that was the hardest part to accept, that sometimes the people we build our lives around don't see the scaffolding that holds everything up. They only see the finished house, the bright lights of someone else's laughter. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of those empty spaces in my chest. I didn't know yet what I would do, but as I drifted off to sleep, I felt something harden in me, a quiet resolve, a recognition that this story didn't have to end with me being erased. The days bled together after I learned that Michael's stepfather had paid for the wedding. It wasn't the money itself that gnawed at me. It was the finality of it, the way it signaled that Michael had found a new center of gravity. And so I turned inward, into the quiet of this house, where the past was still alive in small, almost sacred ways. On a Sunday afternoon, I pulled down an old cardboard box from the top shelf of my bedroom closet. The box had been there for years, collecting dust in the shadows. Inside were the relics of a fatherhood that felt like it belonged to someone else now. A crayon drawing of the two of us standing beneath a crooked rainbow, the word Dad scrawled across the top in bright red letters. A Father's Day card he had made in the second grade, all glue and construction paper, the edges curled from time. I spread these things out on the living room floor, the late afternoon light slanting in through the windows. Each piece was a small, undeniable proof that I had been there, that I had mattered once. I picked up a small toy airplane, its paint chipped and wings bent from too many flights down the hallway. I remembered the night we had built it together, his laughter echoing off the walls as I showed him how to make it fly just right. I let the memory wash over me, and for a moment, it felt like he was still that boy, still mine. But the photos from the wedding were always there, just beyond the edge of my vision. I would see Michael in that suit, dancing with a man who had stepped in where I had been left behind. I tried to bury that image in the clutter of old report cards and finger paintings, but it never stayed buried for long. One night, after the house had gone dark and the only sound was the slow hum of the refrigerator, I sat down at my desk and began to write. Not to Michael. I knew he wouldn't read it. Instead, I wrote to myself. I wrote down every memory I had of us, every moment that had made me believe that being his father was the most important thing I'd ever do. I wrote about the nights I'd carried him up to bed after he'd fallen asleep on the couch, the way his small body had curled against my shoulder, trusting me to keep him safe. I wrote about the first time he'd called me Dad, the sound of it like music in a house that had been too quiet for too long. I wrote about how I believed that love was enough to build something that would last. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam. When I finished, I folded the letter and slipped it into the photo album, between two pages where Michael's face still smiled out at me, a boy who had once looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered. I didn't know what would become of that letter, whether it would ever be read or just gather dust like everything else. But writing it felt like an act of reclamation, a small rebellion against the erasure I felt in every new photo of Michael's life. And then, in the quiet that followed, I thought of the college fund. I had built it slowly over the years, small deposits from every paycheck, a promise I'd made to myself that he would always have something to fall back on. It had been my way of ensuring he'd have every chance, every opportunity one never had. But now, looking at these scraps of paper and glue, I realized that fund was no longer his to claim. It wasn't about punishing him. It wasn't about taking something away. It was about honoring what those years had meant to me and refusing to let those memories be rewritten by someone else. That money was a piece of my heart, and I was done giving pieces of myself to someone who didn't see them for what they were. So I began to make plans. Small, careful steps. I didn't know exactly what I would do with the fund, but I knew it would no longer be his. And in that decision, I felt something in me settle. Like a door closing softly behind me, leaving only the echo of quiet resolve. I approached it the way I approached every project I'd ever taken on, carefully, methodically, each step measured against the quiet ache in my chest. The college fund had been my offering to Michael, a quiet testament to every sleepless night, every compromise I'd made to give him the life I thought he deserved. But I saw now that it wasn't his to claim anymore. Late at night, when the house was still and the only light came from the glow of the computer screen, I began to move the money. My hands were steady, my breath slow and even. I moved it piece by piece, account by account, transferring it into a trust that would serve a different purpose. I wasn't sure yet what that purpose would be. Maybe scholarships for children who had no one else to stand behind them. Maybe something to build in my own name, for no one else but me. For the first time in years, the future felt like it belonged to me. Each click of the mouse felt like a quiet punctuation, a way of marking that I would no longer be defined by the choices of a son who had already left me behind. It was a small, deliberate act of reclamation. I didn't do it in anger. I did it because I needed to feel the weight of something I still had control over, something that couldn't be taken from me by a wedding invitation that never came. I remembered when I'd first opened the fund. Michael had been 6, and I'd watched him sleep on the couch after a long day at the park, his small face flushed with sun and laughter. I'd made a silent promise to him then, that I would always be there, always be the foundation he could build on. But promises change and foundations crack. I was learning, slowly, that I couldn't hold up the weight of both of us anymore. I didn't tell anyone about what I was doing. Not friends, not colleagues, not even James. It felt like a secret just for me, a quiet defiance against the erasure that had threatened to swallow me whole. The money was never about the dollars and cents. It was about the man I had tried to be. about the love I had poured into a son who had stopped seeing it. At work, I kept my head down, let the blueprints fill the space where memories of Michael used to live. Each line I drew felt sharper, more deliberate. In the office, no one asked why I stayed late every night, or why I seemed to move a little slower, a little quieter. I think they sensed that something had shifted in me, like a beam that had finally been braced, no longer in danger of collapse. One night, after the last of the money had been moved, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and stared out into the darkness. I thought of Michael's laughter at the wedding, the easy way he had turned to another man in the space I had once filled. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just a kind of hollow relief. I knew this wouldn't change the past. It wouldn't erase the years I had spent loving a son who no longer saw me. But it was a line drawn in the sand, a quiet testament to the fact that I was still here, that I still mattered, even if only to myself. In the end, it was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming something that had always been mine to give and mine to take back. A final, silent blueprint of my own making. And in the quiet of that night, as I turned off the lamp and let the darkness settle around me, I felt, for the first time in a long while, the faintest flicker of peace. A week after the wedding, I found myself standing outside the venue, an old brick building that once housed a textile mill, now lit up in soft amber light. I'd driven past it before, always curious about the place, never imagining I'd be unwelcome here. But that night, the lights had gone out, and the windows stood dark and quiet, like the hollow sockets of an empty house. I didn't have a key, but the back door had been left unlocked, an oversight, or maybe a small mercy. I stepped inside, and the silence pressed in on me like the echo of 1,000 voices that no longer filled the space. The wooden floors still smelled of spilled champagne, and faint shadows of streamers clung to the corners of the ceiling. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, as if I might wake the ghosts of the wedding that had already moved on. I could almost see them, the swirl of a white dress, the low hum of laughter, the way Michael's eyes must have lit up as he danced with the man who had taken my place. I let the imagined sounds wash over me. The clinking of glasses, the piano playing softly in the corner, the easy rhythm of joy I had never been invited to share. I thought of how I had once believed that my love for Michael would be enough to hold us both. I had built every part of my life around that belief. But standing in the empty room, I understood that sometimes the foundation is laid only to be claimed by someone else. That the love we give can be swallowed by silence and rewritten by other hands. In my pocket, I carried a single photo. It was a picture of Michael and me at the beach. He was 6 years old, his small hand clutching mine as he leaned forward, grinning at the camera. His eyes were bright, his face open and trusting. I had kept that photo tucked away in the bottom of my drawer for years, but now it felt like a piece of something I needed to leave behind. I walked to the center of the dance floor and placed the photo down, the paper soft and worn at the edges. I didn't say a word. There was no one to hear me, and the words would have only echoed in this quiet, empty space. Instead, I let the photo rest there, a quiet offering to a memory that no one else would ever see. A way of saying, I was here, too. I mattered, too. I stood there for a long time, listening to the soft creak of the old wooden beams and the distant hum of traffic outside. The air felt heavy, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. I let myself feel it all. The years I had spent trying to be enough, the heartbreak of realizing I never would be, and the small, quiet relief of knowing I had finally stopped trying. When I left, I didn't look back. I stepped out into the night, the cool air wrapping around me like a balm. In that moment, I felt the finality of it settle in my bones, the understanding that the past was a house I no longer needed to live in. I carried only the weight of my own memories, and for the first time, it felt light enough to bear. The days that followed felt almost weightless. The college fund was gone, redirected to a trust that had nothing to do with Michael, nothing to do with the boy who no longer saw me. The wedding photos had been replaced by the slow rhythm of my own life, each day a small, deliberate step away from the man I had once been. I spent my evenings in the quiet of this house, the rooms echoing with memories that no longer had the power to cut as deep. There was no final confrontation, no dramatic last word. just the gentle hush of acceptance, like the soft tide that pulls away from the shore without fanfare. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with the old photo album open in front of me. I let my fingers trace the worn edges of each page, the images of a childhood that felt both impossibly distant and achingly close. Michael's small hands clutching mine. The bright, earnest smile of a boy who once believed I could fix anything. I thought about all the ways I had tried to be enough. The late nights, the early mornings, the quiet, steady love I had built around him like a shelter. I thought about how easily he had walked away from that shelter, and how long it had taken me to realize that love is only ever yours to give. What others do with it is never within your grasp. I closed the album slowly, the leather soft beneath my palms. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a kind of quiet gratitude for what those years had been. Because they had mattered, even if only to me. I wrote in my journal that night, a final letter to myself. I wrote about the small hands of a boy who had once reached for mine, the late nights spent by his bedside when he was sick, the quiet pride of watching him grow into a man. I wrote about the ache of being left behind and the gentle relief of realizing that not every story ends the way we hope. Some simply find a quiet close, a soft exhale in the dark. When I finished, I set the pen down and leaned back in my chair. The house was silent, but it was a comforting silence now, no longer a void, but a soft place to rest. I let the weight of the years settle in my bones, felt it hum in the quiet spaces of my chest. I thought of Michael, wherever he was. I hoped he would find the happiness he was searching for. And I hoped, too, that he might one day remember the man who had built a foundation beneath his feet, even if he'd chosen to walk away from it. In the end, I understood that the real act of revenge was never about taking something back. It was about reclaiming the part of me that had always been mine, the quiet certainty that love, even unreturned, is never wasted. It lives in the small spaces, in the quiet rooms of an old house, in the breath of a man who has finally learned to let go. I closed the album and set it on the shelf. I turned off the light and stood in the darkness for a moment, feeling the peace that had finally settled in my chest. Then I walked away, into the quiet night, carrying only the simple truth that had taken me so long to find. I had loved. And in the end, that was enough. If this story of quiet reclamation and bittersweet peace resonated with you, I invite you to reflect on your own journey of letting go. Have you found your own quiet revenge, or the small, unspoken ways to reclaim what was once yours? Share your thoughts, your story, or your silence. Sometimes, the telling is the final act of closure. See you soon in the next story.